Good afternoon, everyone. I guess you can Google me if you want a picture of me, but I'm Courtney Nomiyama. I'm a humanities librarian here at Hamilton Library. Part of my job involved kind of like looking at the digital scholarship side of things. So I'm here to really introduce you folks to kind of building your online academic profile. Like, what is your digital story online and what do you want that to be? And trying to consider that from all angles. Okay, so this is kind of a rough outline of what I'll be talking about today. So what exactly do I mean by an online academic presence? Why would I want one? And then I'll talk through kind of several options that are available to you. First of all, I'll go through our institutional repository available through the library. I'll talk about two different types of academic IDs and Google Suite, kind of the pros and cons of each and things you should consider. And then for all of a general overview of kind of like privacy considerations, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up. Of course, feel free to ask questions. Kristen will be monitoring the chat, and will there also be a survey at the end? Okay, so online academic presence. For the purposes of this workshop, I'm not really so much focused on metrics. So obviously they do kind of play a role in that. But I'm really looking at, does something come up when your name pops up, for example, like really focusing on the visibility of your work and also the continuity of like showing your work. And also I'm a humanities librarian, but I am trying to keep this like very general. This is just kind of a big overview of what it means to tell like your online story, so to speak. And I do recognize like you folks might know more than me just because you have more, disciplinary knowledge and whatnot, and what you'll know, like, where you should have your work published and so on and so forth. This is just kind of the more general stuff. And as a general principle, I will be focusing on tools from nonprofits or campus endorsed tools. I'm probably not really endorsing, things that you necessarily have to pay for. Okay, so why an online academic presence? So I think the benefit of that is you really show off your body of work in one place. You can also connect with other academics. Like, I'm sure when you're out doing your work in the field, sometimes you're Googling other people and see what they're doing. Other people can do the same for you. You can also find opportunities, or sometimes opportunities find you because they associate your name with that particular body of work. And I really want to underscore that this is ultimately a form of digital storytelling and really getting, your academic journey out there, and, that's beneficial to you. For example, if you're, looking for jobs, for example, or if you want to be recognized in this particular area. Okay, so I'm going to kind of walk through different aspects or different ways that you can kind of build your digital presence. So I'm going to start with our institutional repository. So this is known as ScholarSpace. It is our institutional repository that is hosted and maintained by the library. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to navigate in between several windows here, so be patient with me, please. So I'm just opening up. Everybody can still see the screen, correct? Even though I'm navigated out of the presentation. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to look at UH Millen Library. First result. You're going to go down to the research tab and where it says ScholarSpace. So this is our institutional repository. It is an open access digital institutional repository. Basically, anyone affiliated with UH can deposit their work here. So I'm just going to demo what that looks like. We're not going to like go through the whole thing, obviously, but this is just the Google form. Can I just fill it out, and then someone will be in contact with you to kind of upload your work. The benefit of ScholarSpace is that if you can see here that it's kind of organized by communities, and generally speaking, they are by like program, department, or your discipline. And as you can see, there's kind of like a little bit of a huge variance. Like obviously some departments are a little bit more built out than others. So for example, like just scanning on here, looks like Center for Oral History has a lot of stuff uploaded, whereas American Studies, not so much for whatever reason. I'm just gonna scroll down here to recent submissions just to kind of show what it looks like. I'm gonna click on this poster. I believe these are from JABSOM scholars, so the medical school folks. So this is just kind of like what an entry looks like, an example of something that you can upload. Kind of something I just want to point out is that you can actually access the file. It's not just information about the file. So you can click on things that maybe you would not have access to if you didn't attend the conference, for example. Other things is that it also has a permanent ID, a permanent URL that you can navigate back to. It'll always consistently navigate back to this page. Another thing is that you can also give your file metadata. So it might be helpful, for example, if you want to make sure that your, whatever that work that you're working on is associated with these key terms, that you want to be sure your work pops up when people are looking at those things. Another beauty about ScholarSpace is that you can upload a bunch of different file types. So for example, this one's a PDF, but you can also, there are also MP3s on here for, I imagine, for a lot of like the language folks, for example. So I'm just doing a quick search on MP3. I'm going to click on this one, for example. And you can click on the side and you see the different types of, oops, sorry, I don't want the icon. Okay. You can see on the side that they also have MP3 uploaded. So don't just think that it's only journal articles. You can also upload a variety of different formats. So depending on, if your scholarly output is a little bit more diverse than just the written record, this would be another place to kind of deposit your work. And that's not necessarily true of other places that you can upload your work. I think some are very obviously written focused. And we also upload images as well. You can also find JPEGs on Scholarspace too. Okay. Another good thing about Scholarspace is that you can kind of control the relationships to other like the authors. So for example, on here you have fields such as author, but also the speaker. Depending on what you're uploading, you can also kind of like show other relationships depending on, if you think it's important to knowing or understanding the record. Whereas I think most things would only allow you to like put like the author, but you might put things like such as reviewer, for example. Okay, I'm going to navigate back to my PowerPoint. So that's just kind of like a quick and dirty introduction to Scholarspace. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the pros and cons. So obviously a big pro of Scholarspace is that it is free to you as students. It's not like every time that you upload that you're not paying anything. Second big thing is that there are permanent persistent URLs for your work. So they shouldn't break. I, knock on wood, haven't heard of any of them breaking since I've been here. Not that it's been that long, but according to my colleagues, they're pretty stable. Another thing is that compared to other repositories, they support multiple file types. Now, within reason, I don't think anyone has tried to upload anything too crazy. Like, I don't think we necessarily have a storage limit, but I don't want like the takeaway to be here necessarily go crazy. So just something to think about, but not saying to discourage you from uploading, but within reason that you think would be of use also to like the wider academic community as well. Okay, some cons. I don't know if you could tell too much, but Scholarspace is a little bit sometimes hard to navigate. The user interface is not always the best. And also there's a little bit of an inconsistency. If you could see just when I was doing that little bit of scrolling in terms of some departments are better represented on there than others. So, and we call on Scholarspace, we call those like communities. So like you put your work in a specific community, for example. And it's really kind of up to the people in that department, whether or not how well established they are. So maybe some people in your department, like they're crazy uploaders of Scholarspace, whereas other departments less so, because maybe they don't really want to upload it or they found another place to upload it. I'm not sure exactly the reason. So if you're hoping to be discovered on Scholarspace, I'm not sure that I would say that that's the best place. I would say it's probably more of a good place to upload your work just so you can have like a permanent URL kind of thing. Also, very important to note, this is very much tied to your institutional affiliation. So obviously you folks are able to upload to Scholarspace because, you are affiliated with the University of Hawaii system. But once you graduate, it's not like you can tell us like, please upload my work. It's very much like your work tied to when you're at this institution. So something to think about. So if you are going to use it, make sure you're doing it like when you're here. I don't know if you can retroactively be like, please upload this or something like that. So some general considerations. I think Scholarspace is very useful for linking on your CV or on other places, just so there's a permanent spot for whoever's looking at it to kind of look at. Another thing to think about is that there's not necessarily a personal profile. So if you can click on your name, but it usually just brings up like other things that you have uploaded. There's no way that you can like write a bio per se or, talk about other things related to your work. If you do see any on Scholarspace, that's because I think they used to allow it and then they decided that they're not going to do it anymore. So it's kind of a legacy remainder thing. But going forward, there's no such thing as like a personal profile on Scholarspace. So personally, I think its best use is probably, uploading your work for free and keeping it accessible in place if you want. Like maybe someone wants to read, maybe someone reaches out to you like, hey, I want to read this. And then I would give them, upload it and then give them the URL. Okay, so that's Scholarspace. Talk a little bit about academic IDs now. So I'm going to talk about two different ones. So I'm going to start with ORCID, pronounced like the flower. So it is, you can think of your ORCID as like your persistent researcher ID. It's also been called like your academic social security number, your personal version of a DOI. I would say ORCID functions a little bit like an academic LinkedIn per se. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring up ORCID here. Okay, I'm going to use some of my colleagues as examples for ORCID, but basically you're just assigned a number that's considered like your researcher ID. I'm going to use the university librarian, my big boss. So this is Clem. Several things I just want to point out here. Something that's kind of nice about ORCID is that Clem goes by Clem, but is actually short for Clement, but he can input kind of multiple variations on his name. So if you haven't decided how you want to be, maybe you haven't made up your mind yet, I don't know. Orchid does kind of capture the different ways that you presented yourself. So it looks like here he's gone by his like full government name, for example. Sometimes he uses the middle initial, sometimes he doesn't. I'm gonna go ahead and just click on his profile here. He's a nice bio, which I assume he wrote. And then he also has kind of his previous places of employment as well. Let's scroll all the way down. Education, qualifications, some publications that he's written. Some things to note about Orchid is that it does require a little bit of updating. So his last job on here says Cal State Fullerton, and obviously we know he's not there anymore because he's here. So needs a little bit of updating there, but so you do kind of have, it does require some ongoing maintenance. So this is an example of one style of doing a profile. I'm going to pick on my other colleague, who I think kind of uses, I think it's a little bit more, I think she updates it a little bit more. So this is Stasha. She's going by her full government name here, as you can see, and she also has like small variations on her name. But so I know her as Stasha, but and then the Orchid nicely captures that in case, I only know her by that name, for example. Other things to point out is that you can link out to other things. So she does actually link out to her LinkedIn here. And she's chosen some keywords kind of in the areas that she like specializes in, for example, what country she's affiliated with, her employment. She does still work here, so that is current. Other thing to point out, education, of course, but the one that I want to point out is that she can also include things like professional activities. So, any professional organizations that you're part of, like any roles that you hold in it. Go all the way down here. Also funding, if you have any of you have grants, it could be another way to kind of display it. And also, of course, her publications. So Orchid is a little bit more flexible in types of the information that it displays. I think it does give you kind of a wide range of things that you can kind of talk about. I do believe that you can even upload things like, not the video itself, but you can have like a category like dance performances, for example, if that is something, of importance to you. So a lot of more flexibility in terms of what information is presented. Okay. And jump back to Orchid. Okay, so Orchid Pros, obviously it's very customizable. You can do anything like the dance performance, like the grants, your funding, if you're a peer reviewer for something. It also allows for multiple names, which I think is really useful. If you go by a nickname, for example, or a different kind of variation of your name, it still kind of like recognizes you as the same person. Really big benefit of Orchid is that it follows you wherever you go, even after you graduate. So as you can see, like with Clem and Stasha, they were all at, a bunch of different places, but their Orchid ID remained the same and it wasn't necessarily tied to, them being at the university, for example. It also was with them at different institutions. Okay, so something to think about, very much like a social security number, you cannot delete your Orchid. It's kind of like, even if you deactivate your account, I believe your ID is still on there forever. It will still exist. I think maybe they'll hide it, but like it's still technically there and still associated with your name. Another thing to consider is there's not really a verification. So when you sign up for something, I think the most it goes is like it verifies your email that it's you and that it exists. So kind of on the other side of that, I would say is if you are using Orchid to find other scholars, I would probably do your due diligence and make sure that person exists and that they say who they say they are. Because sometimes Orchid will kind of, people, it does require ongoing maintenance. So if people aren't updating it, you're not necessarily sure that like that information is current. So just general rule of thumb, even outside of Orchid, just make sure that you're like a trust but verify, I guess I'll say, make sure that you're kind of doing your own research as well, not just depending on Orchid to give the most up-to-date information. Okay, some considerations is that it does keep your publications all in one place, regardless of institutional affiliation. Good or bad, I guess, depending. Sometimes when you're, figuring things out, maybe you don't really want to highlight earlier publications. I'm not saying that they suck, but sometimes you're still figuring out your research agenda, for example. They will treat all of your publications the same, whether or not they're peer reviewed, for example, or whether or not, they're published in like a predatory journal. So just consider that. Another thing is it is portable and that it travels with you, but that also means that it has ongoing maintenance. So you saw with Clem, like he didn't put in his most recent job here. So sometimes you got to go back in and add some things as they go along. I mean, very much like when you folks are working on a CV, right? Like you're adding information as you go. Orchid is also not really private, and obviously it is contingent about how much information you're putting in there in the first place, but we'll consider, like, do you want everyone to be able to trace your academic journey to that extent? It to that extent, it's very much publicly available. So to show every, educational institution you've been at, for example, do you want people to know that? Up to you. I'll expand a little bit more about privacy later, but that's kind of something to consider as well. Okay, I'm going to talk about academic ID, the Web of Science. So this is another persistent researcher ID in Clarivate, which is like basically a private vendor. I'm going to go to the library website, back to the library website. So Web of Science is one of the databases that the library has. And contrary to its name, I mean, it's called Web of Science, so obviously it does have Web of Science stuff, but it does actually contain more than the sciences. They do actually, for example, have like humanities and languages things as well. So I'm just going to databases and more. Okay, I'm going to Web of Science here. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and just like look up some professors that we have here at UH. I'm switching it to author. So I'm going to go with one of the faculty in my liaison areas. I'm going to go with Graham Crooks. So thank you, Graham, for letting me use you here. Okay. So this is kind of what it looks like. And they do assign you a researcher ID. Very similar to ORCID. It does kind of like capture different ways that your name is shown. So, here it has his middle initial. Maybe sometimes it only has his last name as first initial, so on and so forth. It also gives you kind of the subjects, that area that he kind of writes things in. The thing that I think, I guess, is, I don't know if cool is the right word to use, but it does kind of break down the metrics in a more detailed way, which might be useful, I guess, maybe if you're applying for a job, for example, if you want to make your case for something. Something to keep in mind, though, is when they are kind of building these profiles, is that it's very much drawn from Web of Science publication. So if your discipline does not publish in any Web of Science index journals, obviously this will be of less use to you. But it's kind of a cool, for those of you that maybe do use Web of Science, this would be a good place to look as well. It also kind of like shows you your, I guess, comparison, if you want to think about that, to other scholars in your area. I also think it's kind of neat that they show you like, oh, where do they tend? Are they a first author, last author? And I know, again, that highly dependent on discipline, if that matters. Another thing is that they show you who they publish with a lot. So they do have like these nice visualizations. So these are the names that probably you'd see with them a lot. For example, I know that Nicole Ziegler is also a professor here at University of Hawaii. So obviously not a surprise that he's also publishing with her. Okay. And so this is an example of a language professor. I'm going to go back into one of our CTAR faculty. So I'm going to do Brent Sipes. Okay, so this is Brent's. Also shows kind of the different names he's going by, where else he's been affiliated with, kind of what areas he practices in. Kind of very similar in terms of like, nice visualization. And also nice thing about Web of Science is that kind of shows like who's being cited by it, who else is in the conversation with Brent about these particular topics. So a nice kind of, I mean, they have money, so they have more money to kind of like make it nicer visually. So it's a good place to look as well. Also points out things like grants, that kind of a thing. So another place to look if Web of Science is something that, your discipline uses. Okay, so obviously a huge perk of Web of Science is that it has a more detailed breakdown of the metrics. So lots of different visualizations available. So different, also captures your different names and the variations of your name so that we know that's like the same person, for example. I would say Web of Science has Web of Science has a couple of cons, though. Probably a big one is that your profile is algorithmically generated. So even if you didn't make the profile to begin with, it'll assume, and kind of like if it sees the same names popping up, it'll like kind of make guesses about who you are and what work is associated with you. So even if you don't claim it, it's still out there on the web anyway. Is that good or bad? Second big thing is that it's proprietary. So it's very much tied, obviously, to this database Web of Science, which is a very expensive database. It is a subscription database that the library pays for. So if you graduate, that obviously sucks because I can't get into it because you're no longer at the university. So something to be aware of, I guess, if you are trying to claim your Web of Science ID, that you do kind of need access from an institutional level in order to kind of have ownership over it. Okay, but some considerations, obviously the metrics are really helpful, and you can also look at other people's kind of impact as well there. And again, really want to underscore, it's called Web of Science, but they do have other disciplines represented on there, including the languages, for example, some arts and humanities. But I would say, obviously, generally speaking, it probably would be more useful to you to have a Web of Science ID if you know that in the journals that you publish in, for example, do actually have their journals indexed on Web of Science. So something to consider. I wouldn't get one if you don't publish in any of their areas. Okay, I'm going to talk about Google Suite. We are a Google campus. So obviously it's very much endorsed, but I would also say be careful of Google just because it's Google. I'm going to talk first about Google Scholar, specifically the Google Scholar profile. So it's basically your scholarly profile hosted on Google. I'm gonna borrow my colleagues again. So Jody Matos is a Hawaiian collection librarian here. She has a Google Scholar profile. Okay, so this is Jody. It lists all of her citations. It also shows who else she is cited by. How many views she gets, for example. And she can also, if some people, if they want to like contact her, this would be a way to look at her work and also see how they can contact her. I believe if you click on it as well, it can also show you kind of a link where you can get access the articles as well. Right, and I'm going to just pull up one more example. Amy Carlson, who is our materials librarian. So this is Amy. Also have her works here as well and kind of show her citation counts, which by the way, it's way easier to look for your citation counts on Google Scholar compared to something like Scholarspace, much harder to look for. Google Scholar does a pretty good job of finding it. Another thing that I just wanted to point out in Amy's, it also shows like authors that she corresponds or that she writes with often. So Jody is here as well. So kind of interesting if you wanted to kind of, I guess, explore the web or the network of scholars in their field. Also like how she has been cited over time, for example, and probably corresponds, with years that she's published work and who's been looking at it and her citation count. And Google Scholar, you just set it up using, I don't think you necessarily have to use their UH email if you don't want to. You can, but it does follow you in that sense. Another good thing about Google Scholar, kind of similar, I suppose, to like Web of Science and ORCID, it does kind of show like in the areas that they're, prolific in. So with Amy, obviously, it's serials work, library work, and she also has a PhD in English, so she does a lot of work in that realm as well. Okay. Okay, so some pros. So way better just at displaying citation metrics, but those are very like basics in terms of like it's been cited by these people. Another thing to note about the Google Scholar profiles, it has very customizable update settings. So you can have it automate if you have a publication, you just want it to be added automatically, for example. I do believe that there is a setting for that. You can also do it manually if that's more your style. Another thing is that there are Google alerts. So you can kind of set it up so if like someone cites you, for example, you can get an email about it, so on. Your profile can also be set to public or private, so you can control your visibility settings. I mean, some might say that you're never truly private if it's already on the internet, but I guess more private. The only difference is that if your profile is set to private, it will not necessarily be included in Google Scholar results. If other people are searching, your name won't necessarily come up. Okay, major cons. I do think it requires a lot of maintenance. So even with automation, hopefully you kind of know this in general, like you do have to come in and still check for mistakes. Sometimes it just associates incorrect information with you. So you do have to go back in and make sure that you're doing your due diligence with that. I would also say the citation count can be a little bit questionable. Google Scholar in general, it indexes a lot of different things and they're not necessarily all academic. So you might see like, oh, someone cited my, journal article or whatever. But when you upon closer inspection, maybe it's just like a blog article or someone included it like as a link on their website. So not necessarily the same thing as what we would think of as like a traditional like citing in a journal article, right? So just double check. Don't all necessarily take the citation count at face value. You just want to make sure you're double checking who exactly is citing you and why. Okay. Next thing I'm going to talk about are Google Sites. So basically, very much a customizable website that runs on Google servers. It is a tool available to you in your Google Suite. So I'm just going to go ahead here. Don't mind my messy drive, but if you go to the nice hamburger menu and where it says Sites, There are a bunch of these options for you for different templates. I think probably a lot of people, they either use the graduates or the professor template. You don't have to get anything too crazy with it, just kind of like information that you think about sharing. So you're not building something from scratch. You're just kind of really typing in the different texts you want to include. For example, if you want to upload your CV, that might be another option as well. I'm going to show you an example of a UH professor who does use a website powered by Google Sites. So this is Andrea's one. Okay, so this is a linguistics professor, Dr. Andrea. So this is powered by Google Sites, pretty basic. And you see she also has an ORCID ID, but she has like a nice bio about herself as well. Other things I would want to point out, she has her CV uploaded as well. I guess people, academics love to look at each other's CVs. And then downloads page, I just wanted to point out something, I guess this is probably like an ideal use case, I would say, of like online presence. Andrea has made good use of like Scholarspace, for example. So she's kind of using a little bit of everything. Like she has the website posted on Google, for example. And she's also, these are Scholarspace URLs because she's pointing to a place where you can view their work. So kind of combination of different things, since not necessarily that one tool can do everything. And she also has an ORCID ID as well. So that's one example. And as you can see, I don't know about her, digital website skills, but it's pretty, straightforward. It's not anything too fancy. It conveys the information it needs to convey. All right, so Google Sites, the pros, obviously the content is really customizable because you are building something not from scratch per se, but like you can decide what goes on the website and what doesn't. So that can include things like photos or videos, like maybe you want to include a nice headshot of yourself or something like that. You can also take it with you. Word of caution, though, and the reason why I put in quotation marks is that if you do create a website on your hawaii.edu account, you can't necessarily like transfer ownership. You might have to copy content because I think it is locked into like the hawaii.edu kind of base. So just a word of caution, it's not as so simple as like transferring a Google Doc to someone. You might have to just kind of like copy the content over, but it's not necessarily something that's so simple as just like handing it over. So just make sure you kind of have like something on backup, or just keep in mind that you might lose access to it once you graduate kind of. So I do think UH lets you keep your email after you graduate. So maybe it's okay, but they probably won't love if you're using a bunch of space on their servers if you're not a current student. So word of caution. Okay, cons, beyond the template, which is pretty, I would say, standard, you do have to input everything yourself. So there's no automation, obviously, because it's not the same as like looking for peer-reviewed articles and such. So there is a lot of, there's some design involved. Some people don't like that because they don't like having to think about aesthetics. Maybe some people do. Maybe you really have your HTML and CSS dreams are coming true. So this would be an option for you. But something to consider is that there is more customization, but a little bit more work on your end to kind of like design and put everything together. A major consideration for Google, both Google Scholar as well as Google Sites, is that Google is fundamentally a business. Like I know that we have Google for Higher Education or Google for Education or whatever, and we are a Google campus, but I would kind of remind everyone that Google is a for-profit entity. So they will make decisions based on what is beneficial to them as a business. And I don't think they've made any indication necessarily that they're going to shut down like Google Scholar or Google Sites, but do know that, there's a chance that they could sunset some features if it no longer, benefits them financially. Another thing I would point out is that, a lot of these things are quote unquote free, like you can make a Gmail for free, but at the cost of your data, for example. So just be mindful of like what data you're sharing about or what information you're sharing about yourself, not only on Google, but also in general. Okay, I'm also gonna talk a little bit about academic social media. I'm sure you folks maybe have considered it. Some people are kind of like social media academic famous, or you might have seen people when you're scrolling or something, for example. So places like TikTok, Blue Sky, X, or Twitter, or whatever it's called now. And I was also given the advice in graduate school that you have to be active on social media in order to get a job. And I can say that's false. I don't feel like my social media helped me get the job or anything like that. But I will urge you folks to keep in mind that social media, like Instagram, X, so on and so forth, they are also businesses. So what exactly are they doing with your data? Probably not great things. But that's not to say that social media bad. I don't know if you folks have heard of this case. This was, I believe, 2 years ago now. So this was Dr. Ali Look. She went viral for posting about finishing her PhD. And also, by the way, I think her PhD was in English. So she was posting on Twitter on completing it, and she went viral and had like a huge reaction, both good and bad. And, obviously, I think a lot more people engaged with her work outside of the academic community because she posted it on social media. So I think on her institution's equivalent, like their institutional repository, I think it got like a bunch of downloads because they're like random people on the internet looking it up. So, but she also got a lot of like negative attention as well. So, but she did get I believe she's working on a book right now. Like she has literary agents, probably related to kind of like her online success, if you want to call it that. And this is more of an example of like, I guess, a viral success story. And like, I don't want to say that everyone who goes on social media, like, will obviously go viral. So kind of a word of caution, like social media can be used to kind of raise awareness and visibility about your work, but also keep in mind that the haters are also on there and also what's happening with your data. So I'm not saying I'm necessarily endorsing social media, but I guess I'll say I personally don't have one for academic purposes. So, okay. Underscoring all these, I just really want to highlight privacy concerns. Anytime that you put something on the internet, it does stay on there forever, of course. So how much of your information do you want out there? What do you want your employers to know about you? I'm sure you Google other scholars in your field, so they're doing it to you as well. Something to think about. What is the content on you online say about you? And another thing is you want to consider about automation aggregation. With automation that we were talking about, sometimes the information is just incorrect. And do you want that information associated with you, or you just got to make sure that you're monitoring that? And kind of a personal example is that I used to work in, don't Google me please after this, but I used to work in state government, and there was this online database that was trying to, aggregate information about people who worked in government, and they linked my undergraduate student profile, my student portfolio, which they did not ask me, of course, but it was weird because it felt like it was intersecting like my personal and professional life, so to speak. And I think it's still, again, don't Google it, but kind of an example of like when you're Googling something, you don't necessarily control how the internet is like putting the pieces together. So something to consider when, you are pursuing scholarly online presence. What do you want there out in you? And your audience is always wider than you think, but that's not to say that, it can't do good as well. We saw, Dr. Ali Looks in the previous viral social media moment. And I will also say that I think I had like my email on something, and someone did email me in fall semester asking me to do a webinar when I don't know if they would have found me otherwise. Like they found me on. So that's not to say that like don't ever be online, but just kind of keep in mind both the pros and the cons. Like you can be discoverable, but maybe too discoverable. So just make sure that you're exercising caution. You don't want weird things to happen to you as well. Okay, so it's kind of a lot things to consider in terms of what it means to be online. Just really want to urge you folks that there's no like definitive or recommended way to kind of build your online presence. Probably what I would do are the best recommended approaches, or even what Andrew was doing, like a little bit of everything. Maybe use Scholarspace to get the permanent URLs, for example, but you're using Google Sites to kind of control the narrative, like what information you want on you. You can also control the privacy settings, for example. Not everybody necessarily needs to like do the same thing in order to be known in their respective academic fields. And I would also say if you're a permanently offline person, like that's fine too. I'm sure you can still make it work. It's just for people who are interested. You don't necessarily always have to do all the things online in order to be known. And I would also really, really, really emphasize what kind of information you want out there. Like what exactly does putting information about your academic self online, like what is it doing for you? Like if you are using it to network with others, like what information do they need? You don't necessarily need to put everything, for example. If you're doing it to just like network with other scholars, or if you're just trying to like, I want to provide more access to my work, just there are different ways to go about it. Okay. Any questions? And then before we leave, I don't want to forget to do the survey, but I'm going to open the floor to questions. I know questions percolate, so if you want to have one later, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to go ahead and just go into the survey slide, though.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's workshop. Everyone enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, folks.